with the reading guide that I presented for the week of May the 18th, for you to watch again a section in particular of the video classes that I prepared on the notions that we are using to analyze verbs. The one that I had invited you to watch again was the one dealing with the concept of aspect and inherent meaning, and lexical aspect, and then specific questions that I posed so that you would use as a guide for you to see how much you were able to explain in terms of this topic. The distinctions that Riemann and Quirk make in terms of situation types, if you were able to find the distinctions, understand them, make the connections between these distinctions and the ones that we're using this year of situations being divided into activity states, accomplishments, and achievements. If you saw, the connecting points between the two categories or the two types of categorizing such notion of situation, that is, if you had read the second chapter by Conry, the chapter in which he tackles, this axis of meaning that allow us to distinguish situations in terms of their having, duration or not, in terms of their being telic or not, in terms of their being stative or not. If you were able to see, to understand what is it that we mean when we say that lexical aspect has a compositional nature. That is not just the case that we pay attention to the meaning that the verb has in isolation, but it's the verb put to use in a specific sentence that tells us what type of situation it represents. There's some interaction going on the chat. Everybody?
Sorry, it was me.
Because making sure that everybody was
yes.
Okay. Listening to what I was saying. So I am just, trying to find some common ground between you and me and see if we're all on the same page in terms of what I suggested that you do to go back to the video class in terms of aspect, in terms of lexical aspect, to see if you could address those questions, theoretical questions that are part of my reading, guide. And if anybody here has today any questions and would like to ask these and take advantage that I am, here to address them. I hope you know what document I'm making reference to, right? This is the document that I prepared the week before last week so that you could have some, guidance in terms of your re-watching, watching again the section in my video class that tackles aspect in all its, ways of being interpreted. You have a question, Alan. Good for you. I'm glad that you are here and that you can ask the question. Go ahead. You can turn your camera on and ask the question using your microphone, so no need to write it on the chat room, but you have. What does it mean by compositional nature of lexical? Well, this is what you should be able to explain. This is crucial. This is a very important notion that is explained in my video class. The video class that I'm making reference to is the one called Video 35, Part 1, at point 33 minutes 15 seconds. This is the moment in the video in which I start tackling this notion, lexical aspect that is. And, you know, once I begin explaining, I tackle this idea of lexical aspects having a compositional nature. Would anybody present here like to address this question?
Hello.
Hello, Julieta.
I wanted to participate, but to see if I could grasp the concept correctly, because I'm not quite sure.
Okay, this is the very purpose of this class. Yeah.
What I understood was can change depending on the, for example, if an adverbial accompanies it or not. And I remember, for example, the verb run, which can be considered an accomplishment. But if we say I ran or I run to the finish line, that final adverbial like puts an end point to the duration of that verb. So it makes it an achievement instead of an accomplishment.
Well, running, thank you, Julieta. You are on the right track, but let's correct your answer a little bit. The situation of running does not, in its internal meaning, that is to say, the way running is associated with pointing to a specific situation type, to a specific definition. This dictionary entry that we may associate, we have in terms of the lexical, entry running or run. In itself, running does not entail a finishing point. Running is an activity. Just considering it in isolation. But the moment we put it to use in a specific instance of language use, we may speak of running a marathon or running to the finishing line, right? Which is no longer representing the same situation that running in isolation represents or depicts, but rather adds to it, an external facet, not one that is included, in the dictionary entry in its definition in isolation, but rather adds to it a finishing point. Running in and of itself does not entail it being associated with something that, makes it finish. To run is an activity. But the moment we use it in a sentence that reads, say, I ran last weekend's marathon, or I ran so-and-so marathon, we are, impacting on the meaning that running has by adding this entity marathon, to it, this direct object, syntactically speaking. If you run something like a marathon, you are, delimiting, putting a limit to the situation of running. Therefore, you're turning an activity which has no finishing point associated with it into an accomplishment because you're adding a finishing point to the situation in question. And you have done so compositionally, in the sense that you are doing so by adding, in this case, a direct object, to the verb in question. And by using this direct object, you are bounding it. You are delimiting it. It is not running forever and ever, but running a marathon that entails a point at which you're no longer running. Okay? So it is not exactly dividing an accomplishment, or turning an accomplishment into an achievement, but rather an activity, running, into an accomplishment. Accomplishment is dynamic, like an activity is. Therefore, it is not a state that we're talking about, but there is action involved. It is dynamic in its nature, but different from an activity that has no telic point, no finishing point associated with it. Run a marathon does. Therefore, it is bounding, adding a telic, point to it. And we have done so compositionally because we have done so in a sentence that employs the verb plus the direct object. True. So, Julieta, very true. When talking about lexical aspects, we're not just considering the meaning of the verb in isolation. We start from that. We think of what we know the verb means. We look it up in a dictionary when we don't know so. We have a definition, of what a specific situation is. But then we see the verb in question in an actual instance of language use, and we see if any other elements in that sentence that we are considering impacts, for example, a direct object in this case, on the meaning the situation has. This is no longer an activity that has no finishing point associated with it, but it is in fact a situation that has a finishing point. And how have we added this finishing point, this notion of finishing point, to the situation represented by means of this verb in this sentence? By using a direct object in this case. But it is not the only mechanism, the direct object, that allows us to impact on the meaning that a situation has. When you take a look at the video class that I prepared on the analysis of empiezo a leer ahora, shall I start reading now? Right? That I hope you watch again. I hope you have watched it. And if you haven't, please do. It is posted on our YouTube channel. There, you'll see that I point out the fact that we have leer, again, another activity, because leer in isolation does not entail a finishing point, in as much as running doesn't either, okay? But the moment we have leer in a specific type of structure, a perífrasis verbal incoativa, in Spanish, incoativa because there's this, focus on this change of state from not reading to reading. If you say, profe, empiezo a leer ahora, you're telling me, okay, I'm not reading now, but I'm about to do so if you let me, right? So the moment we use leer, the verb, the main verb in that perífrasis, in a specific type of structure, such as perífrasis verbal incoativa, we're turning an activity into an achievement, because empezar a leer is not the same as leer. Empezar is that very, fragment of time when you start to do something, which only takes, a very limited amount of time. And then you continue reading. That's a different story. Then uno empieza a leer y sigue leyendo, but the situation represented by empiezo a leer is only pointing to one instance, one instant, sorry, of time in which the situation of beginning to do something, such as reading, starts. So the meaning of leer has been impacted upon. How come? Because it's been used in a verbal periphrasis of a sort that focuses the situation only on its beginning. That's why it is called perífrasis verbal incoativa. And because of the type of auxiliary verb empezará, empezar, that we have in question, the part of the situation that we are paying attention to is its beginning only. And when you begin something, it's only a moment in which you do so. And therefore, it's turned into an achievement. Okay? Okay, so Alan, you've got to understand the distinction between, accomplishments, achievements, activities, and states prior to your understanding that it is the other elements, that are used in conjunction with the verb that we're focusing on that may have an impact on the type of situation that verb represents. If you say to me, I like reading, what you are portraying, what you're representing is an activity, right? But if you tell me, I just read the whole chapter, read a chapter entails a finishing point. Thus, using a whole chapter has turned an activity into, again, an accomplishment. I'm using accomplishment and not achievement because chances are you won't read a chapter in a second, in a millisecond, but it'll take more time. Therefore, it'll have duration associated with it. In contrast, achievements do not have duration associated with them. You're welcome, Julieta, and thank you, Alan, too. Okay, any other question? You're welcome. Okay, so if you have no more questions, let me tell you now what we expect you to do in terms of, the self-study activity that begins on page 116 in our handbook and finishes on 119. This is an invitation for you guys to sit down and understand the different meanings that may be associated with the different tenses that we are studying or reviewing, for that matter, in this class. So we can understand that there is a tense in English called simple present, and we know that this tense may be used for the denotation, for the representation of meanings such as habitual action, for the representation of an action that is habitually occurring, or for the denotation of a state that is considered to be permanent, right? This is what you have been doing for many years now. The type of analysis that you did in first year and second year grammar English, right? And the description of the meanings and the uses associated with the different tenses in English. And the counterpart for Spanish that I presume you did in first year as well, Spanish grammar. Now, what we suggest that you do is take a look at the chart that we have, laid out on those pages for you, and see if the languages that we study converge or diverge, right, in terms of using the same or different tenses for the denotation, for the representation of those meanings that are listed on the left. So, for example, in terms of habitual actions, considering the meaning habitual action, does Spanish make use of presente indicativo for the denotation of such meaning? If so, then there is an area of convergence between English and Spanish, because two simple tenses, presente, simple present, may be employed for the representation of the meaning habitual action in the present. Okay, so we are not going to do this in class, nor are we going to give you a key for this table. This is an invitation for you to do it yourselves. When you're analyzing the different meanings and uses of English tenses, and you're doing the same thing for Spanish tenses, see if you can fill in, those spaces in the table, so that you begin to study and become more familiarized with those meanings that are, present and represented by similar forms in the languages, or the meanings that are present but are represented by contrasted forms in the languages. Okay? Let me give you an example. For example, the meaning that we associate with the present progressive in English, which is the employment of the present progressive tense in English for the representation of actions that are, annoying on the part of the speaker, right? That point to annoyance or irritation on the part of the speaker. And so we have the employment of a specific tense, which is present progressive, in conjunction with an obligatory adverb of frequency, such as always, such as never, such as all the time. So you can say, oh, she's always, what is she always doing that I feel annoyed about? Can anybody give me an idea? She's always interrupting me when I'm talking. She is always interrupting me when I'm talking. And this annoys me, right? So if we were to explain this usage, we would say that we see the presence of, the employment of present progressive for the representation, for the indication, for the expression of the meaning of annoyance on the part of the speaker. In which case, so that this meaning is unequivocal, the employment of the adverb always or the adverbial all the time is compulsory. Okay? Now, how would we express the same meaning in Spanish? What could be an option? An option could be, siempre hace preguntas o siempre me interrumpe cuando hablo. Siempre me interrumpe. Interrumpir, conjugado en presente indicativo. So there is a divergence at stake, because we have a simple form in use in Spanish, presente indicativo, contrasted against a progressive form in English. So the same meaning is at stake, as it's always the case. The meaning is our point of, departure. We see how meanings are expressed. And we come to the conclusion that there is divergence at the level of syntax because one language employs a progressive tense and the other one employs a simple tense. All right? So this is the type, the type of work, analytical work, conscientious work we want you to do when, when dealing with this self-study activity that invites you to reflect upon the different meanings associated with tenses and the different tenses that are associated with those meanings. Yeah.
Nati,
Yeah.
Julieta says, I don't understand why English and Spanish diverge when expressing future arrangements.
Can you give me an example, Julieta?
In the meantime, while Julieta thinks, Anna asks, so we should fill the spaces with examples from each language that illustrate each meaning?
Exactly. That's what we want you to do. Because we have already postulated that there are certain, meanings that the two languages may convey through the use of tenses or through the use of, for example, modal verbs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll see what mechanisms each language employs for the denotation of set meanings. And you'll see if the mechanisms that are, in focus are convergent or divergent.
So Julieta comes back with the example. The plane leaves at 5 p.m. versus el avión sale a las 5.
When talking about future arrangements, we usually think in terms of, and this is explained by Grima Mamquerque, of an animate subject, a subject associated with an agent that is in a position to make an arrangement. So only animate beings make arrangements, right? What you're talking about there in your example sentence is a sentence that illustrates this meaning of the calendar future, that is usually associated with entities such as a plane, such as a movie, such as, what else? A play, a movie, a train leaving, that has a specific schedule, for departure, for beginning, for arrival, that is the result of yet another entity, organizing such an event, but not the plane in itself, nor the movie in itself. Okay? So in this specific scenario, which is the representation of scheduled events, the two languages converge because you're using leaves, simple tense, sale, simple tense in Spanish.
Natalia says, so we could say that in your example, I don't know, Natalia, if you're referring to Julieta's example or Natalia's example.
I think my example in terms of somebody always interrupting me.
Great. There is convergence regarding the obligatory use of adverbials.
Yeah, you can also add to that because it is necessary for us to have the presence of the adverb functioning as adverbial or the adverbial to, tap into this notion of annoyance. Because it's not just a habit, a frequent action, that we're making reference to, but it is a frequent action that annoys us. And this then is, highlighted by the presence of the adverbials such as always, all the time, and the sort. And in Spanish, siempre me interrumpís o siempre me interrumpe is the same case. So not only then do we tackle in this specific use what the tenses are like, but also the fact that the two languages resort to the employment of adverbials for the reinforcement of the meaning in question. So then there is convergence with respect to the meaning, with respect to the need for the adverbial, but not with respect to the form the tenses have, because one tense is progressive and the other one is simple. You're welcome. Okay. So then this is something important that we suggest you do. And in case you have questions, because this chart was designed by us when we were using in this chair some other sources different from the ones that we use this year. So in case you come across, an instance in which you see no easy way out, pose the question, via the mechanisms that we're using for you to, pose questions with, and we'll tackle those doubts in particular. Speaking of this, speaking of the mechanisms that we have to pose questions and the like, have in mind that I have shared with you all what has transpired in all these classrooms that we have, open, that are made up by the different groups that you have formed. And you can definitely learn from what has happened, in those classrooms of ours, because there's a lot of theory that has been, put to use for the production of explanations, in terms of the questions that some people in my two groups have asked with respect to the material that we have covered so far. So please do not ignore the document that I shared. I believe it was yesterday, Mika?
Yes.
Okay.
Through within our news forum. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so now I think it's the moment to tackle some practice together. And this is the moment when Mika, takes the floor and directs the session, but I'll be here in case I am needed. Okay?
Okay, so on the virtual classroom, you have an activity that was related to the activity you have on the handbook, which is chapter 1, Down the Rabbit Hole. We have prepared, the activity you have in the handbook has two sections. The first one, you have to make the necessary changes to the translation in case changes are needed. And then on the second part of the activity, you are given two contrastive analyses, and you have to spot the mistakes and try to see if you can classify the mistake and how would you provide a new version that is better. So for the first section, the activity was designed to be done on the virtual classroom. I don't know if you were able to do it, and if you have questions as regards any of the options that you weren't able to spot, or any mistake that you found or you didn't find, and eventually when you got the feedback, you saw that that mistake was not seen by you. So I don't know if you have any doubts as regards that section of the activity. As always, if you weren't able to do it for today, and then you can do it tomorrow or on Friday, you can always ask questions. But we think that as you get the feedback when you hand in the activity, we think that maybe the doubts are solved there. So For the second part of the activity, I don't know if any of you could do it. The idea, again, you were given to contrastive paragraphs analysis, and you had to find which were the mistakes and how would you solve them, and if you were able to classify them. It would be better if you share your answers with us. The idea is not give you the answers, but rather that you were able to spot them on your own, to spot the mistakes on your own. So for the first paragraph, you had to compare had versus tenía in the sentence, since it had no pictures or conversations. She thought, what is the use of a book? And the translation was, pero como no tenía dibujos ni diálogos, pensaba, ¿para qué sirve un libro? So the rendition was, in the English version, the simple past tense of the indicative mood has been used. It has imperfective grammatical aspect. As regards lexical aspect, it is a stative verb, and it has the main verb of the subordinate clause of reason, since it had no pictures. As regards the Spanish version, the verb tener is conjugated in pretérito imperfecto simple del modo indicativo. It has imperfective aspect realized in the verb inflection ia. As regards lexic aspect, it is a verbo de estado that appears in a subordinate clause of reason, ya que no tenía dibujos ni diálogos. It is used to denote the background description in the narrative. This is a case of correspondence. So, anyone here that would like to take the floor? So the first problem with this paragraph is that on the second sentence that goes, it has imperfective. Oh, Carolina, thank you. I spotted a mistake regarding grammatical aspect in the analysis of the English version. It has perfective, not imperfective grammatical aspect. Good. So remember that when we speak of, or when we analyze in terms of imperfective or perfective, in English, we speak of the aspectual meaning. We speak of imperfective aspectual meaning or perfective aspectual meaning. And when we have to analyze the grammatical aspect, in English, we will speak of simple, progressive, or perfect. Okay? So the problem there was like the mixing between grammatical aspect and aspectual meaning.
So Mika, can I interrupt?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so it's not a question then of the form showing or having perfective grammatical aspect, because we're dealing with English. And this form had, right, does not grammaticalize the distinction between perfective and imperfective aspect, but rather it denotes either one of the two. So when it comes to English, we say that the form denotes or represents a specific meaning associated with aspect, a specific aspectual meaning, be it perfective or imperfective. But the morphology of the verb in itself does not show it, does not have it. Okay? So instead, the morphology here shows simple aspect. Where you have a simple form whose aspectual meaning, the aspectual meaning denoted by this simple form, is either imperfective or perfective. This is an area of divergence between English and Spanish. Spanish grammaticalizes, right, these two categories in its tensed, inflected verbs. English doesn't. So careful there. It's not a question of the form being perfective, but rather a question of meta-language. The form doesn't show this grammatical aspect, but rather denotes it by means of a simple form, a form that has simple aspect. You go on, Mika.
Alan, pretérito imperfecto simple doesn't exist. It is pretérito imperfecto. Good. So there, the problem was with the name of the tense. Normally, we see that sometimes you tend to confuse or you just mix the name of the tenses from English and Spanish. So please be careful with that. In this case, it will be pretérito imperfecto del modo indicativo or indicative mode. What else? What other mistake have you spotted? You see, for example, as regards lexic aspect, there the problem is with again meta language. Exactly, Julieta. It is not lexic aspect, but lexical aspect. We speak of the lexical aspect. And what else? We have a spelling mistake in the very last sentence. This is a case of correspondence. You write it with an A, and it's with an E, something that we sometimes see in the writings. So please have this in mind when you hand in the next paragraph on the 8th. And what about it is used to denote the background description? Anything there to correct that you may find what is the problem there? We have used, it is used to denote. We have said in some of our videos and when we made the analysis that we advise you to avoid using the to infinitive clauses when the to infinitive of purpose, because we don't know actually the intentions or what the text producers were thinking when writing or translating. In this case, you are analyzing some other person's rendition or paragraph, so we cannot know actually what the text producer was thinking. So we need to rephrase that sentence in order to avoid that from happening. And those are the mistakes that you were supposed to find.
Let me just say something, Mika, in terms of this mistake with respect to the expression, you know?
Yes.
When we are doing analytical work, we are analysts that, you know, take a very detailed look at, you know, somebody else's production, written or oral. Usually it is the case that we work with written productions, with written texts. So this is something that we have to unlearn, that you have to unlearn somehow from what you had learned in first year when you were doing exactly this same type of work, which was to justify or analyze a specific instance of a tense in English or in Spanish, and you were explaining what meaning or what use the tense was associated with. And so you were in the habit of saying, this is an instance of so-and-so tense to express or used to describe the background of a narrative. This is something we want you to avoid because we are analysts that have no idea in terms of the reasons, the intentions text producers had when producing a piece of, discourse, written discourse. So we simply say in, impersonal terms that this is an instance of this tense that expresses, that represents, that indicates this meaning, right? In this instance of language use, this specific tense that we're focusing on expresses, represents, denotes, signals so-and-so meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a problem not with the content, but rather with how this analysis is expressed. We want you to be careful with only producing analyses that speak of what the text in question shows us, not of what we think the text producer thought or had in mind when writing such a text.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Then for the following paragraph, there is a paragraph that is contrasting shall be against llegaré. So you have the sentence, oh dear, I shall be too late, contrasted against, oh querida, llegaré demasiado tarde. So it reads in the English version, this is an instance of the modal verb shall in the indicative mood, plus the bare infinitive of the verb be, denoting prediction about the future. Shall is a substitute for the future use of will in formal style, which accounts for its use in this literary text, and it has deontic modality. Regarding lexical aspect, this is a stance verb. The Spanish version is an instance of the verbs llegar, conjugated in futuro simple del modo indicative, futuro de probabilidad. As regards lexical aspect, this is a dynamic punctual event. There is correspondence in meaning, but not in form, given that we have a modal construction in English and a simple tense proper in Spanish. So, what have you spotted? Great. Ana, shall does not denote mood because it is a modal verb. Exactly. So when we speak of, when we find a modal construction, we cannot speak of shall indicating or be, as here it says, in the indicative mode. We do not speak of mood when we are analyzing a modal construction. Alan, it is not an instance of deontic modality. It is epistemic. It is a prediction. Exactly. You have the text producer classified in the Spanish section, let's say, the form as futuro de probabilidad. So there it is also a contradiction. Indicative mood should not be added to explain shall because it is a modal verb. Yes, Luciano, that is in relation to what Ana said. Something else, I don't know if you have anything else to add. There is the very last sentence. Yes, there is a spelling mistake. It apostrophe s instead of its. the possessive. Good. And the last one is, it reads, there is correspondence in meaning, but not in form. And we would like to make emphasis on that, because sometimes when you, yes, and a spelling mistake in modo indicativo, not indicative, but indicativo. Sometimes when you make your closing remark, you tend to say that there is correspondence in meaning, but not in form. And we always tell you that, remember that the aim of the translation is to make a transference of meaning. We transfer the meaning from one language into another. So there must be correspondence in meaning. What we are analyzing is what are, or by which forms, or how on the syntax we can see these meanings represented. So this would be sometimes maybe the easy way for you to make a closure of a paragraph, but actually you are not focusing on the important points to highlight, let's say. So meaning at stake, it will be the same, hopefully, if you do a good job. So we won't speak of correspondence in meaning, but rather in this case, you will say that there is no non-correspondence because you have a modal construction in English, while you have a tense proper in Spanish. That is more appropriate to tackle. And yes, that's it.
Okay, let me just say something in terms of writing, producing your analyses. Remember that the verb denote is associated with, it collocates with meaning, right? A form denotes this or that meaning. So we cannot speak of denoting mood, because mood is a grammatical category that is seen, that is shown in tensed verbs. So we can speak of denoting a modal meaning, denoting modality, denoting epistemic, deontic modality, and then a form showing or not showing, as in the case of, what was it, shall?
Yes.
As in the case of shall, showing or not showing mood. Mood, the grammatical category, one of the grammatical categories, together with tense, right, and aspect, that inflected verbal forms show. Okay, so careful there with mixing levels of analysis, because one level is semantic and the other one is syntactic or grammatical. All right, I think there is a question posed on the chat.
Anna, can we speak of lexical aspect if we have a modal construction?
Yeah, because a modal construction is made up of a modal auxiliary and a main verb. And the main verb is usually the one that carries lexical information. So in this case, B is the one that allows us to speak of this being a state, right? And then I think it begins, I shall be, what was it like?
Too late. I'll be too late.
Right. So it is a state, a stative situation. You're welcome. Is Lourdes here, Lourdes Juarez? I think you left, Lourdes, but now you're back, or you're not?
She comes and goes, so I don't know.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I have some problems with the connection, with the internet connection.
Okay.
And when I entered the session, I couldn't listen, so I spoke to Mika. But I don't know, like my Wi-Fi is unstable.
Okay, so let's take advantage that you're here, that you're on, that everything is working. How are you, Lourdes?
I'm fine. Yes. I have done the activities for today, and I'm working, studying for my exams.
For your finals?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah,
I hope
know.
that I can take
Sit
them.
for them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So is there anything, seen from your perspective that we haven't mentioned, anything that you would like to comment on, piece of advice that you would like to share with your fellow students?
Yes, I received some questions regarding the table on page 116. Many people ask me how to complete the table, and I suggested them to not only write down some examples, but also some key notions regarding meta-language.
Okay, excellent. So you suggested this to them, for them to do. Mm-hmm.
Yes. For example, I can give you an example, but
yes.
Here, for example, in present simple, in the use number 6, which is performative verbs, according to Riemann and Quirk, this use of the present is known as instantaneous present, that is used with performative verbs. I know that it is like a lot of meta-language in some instances, but it is good that the students can not only write an example, but also put some keywords that may be useful when analyzing an instance in a contrastive analysis.
Exactly, because it's not just a question of us or them writing this label performative verb and that's it, but rather, using it precisely and with the expected meta language. So this is a good piece of advice. So then what you're saying is go to the specific source that uses this label, which is Riemann and Quirk, and see how is it that they explain the meaning in question, right?
Yes, and also I suggest that they do the activities and post the questions in Google Classroom, because the questions that I have received were from my account on Facebook, and I don't have any problem but to answer, but it is important that they post everything in our platform. Yes.
Yeah, because in this way, the rest of the group benefits also, and we're also sharing all these questions and all these interactions that are unfolding on these different classrooms. Thus, the entire student population learns from them. So yeah, it's highly advisable that you don't do it on Facebook, but rather on the different classrooms. I think there's somebody else. Yeah.
Yes, Nati, let me add that we have also shared with them under Unit 2 on where you find the resources for reading. We have shared the chapter on verbs from Zorrilla, where you can find there more detailed as regards to different usages of the tenses and with examples. So you can profit from that we have shared with
Excellent. Lourdes, anything else?
Yes, and I suggest that the students take advantage of the class and participate and to do the homework. I know that it is a lot, because when I did it, it took me many hours, but it is worth it. Then they will clear out all their doubts, and then it will be everything clear for the term test eventually.
Yeah. Thank you, Lourdes. But I think we were good enough, because last week we didn't contact them, did we, Mika?
No, just to let them know that we have moved the deadline for the verb tense paragraph.
So we were giving them more time so that they didn't need to worry much over the week.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, 2 questions have been posted on the chat. Is it okay to just say that the lexical aspect is dynamic, not punctual as the example, or should we specify that it is an accomplishment? Yeah, thank you, Luciana. That's an important question. When you're pointing to the lexical aspect being dynamic, punctual or not, what you're doing is refer to the features associated with the situation type in question. So it is a situation that involves dynamism or not, that involves duration or not. So you're tackling the situation with respect to its characterizing features, so to speak. But other than that, why not use the category, the label, say accomplishment, state, achievement, or activity that we are teaching you this year. So other than simply mention the features that make up the situation type, you also use the specific meta language to refer to the specific situation type in particular. So tackle lexical aspect in the two ways, by mentioning the features and by mentioning the label itself. You're welcome. And Julieta, what is referred to when we speak of tense proper? That we have a specific tense, that is to say, it is an inflected form in the language. For example, futuro imperfecto en español. That's a tense proper. It is not a proper tense. So it is important that you use proper correctly. That is to say, immediately after the noun. Okay? This is the postpositive use of an adjective, such as proper. So immediately after the noun tense, because it points to the existence of an inflected form that exists in the system Spanish, such as futuro imperfecto. In contrast, in English, we have no future tense proper to speak of. In English, we have different means for the expression of futurity. Some of them are tensed mechanisms, because we can speak of, as we were speaking about before, the employment of the present progressive tense or the simple tense to point to a future situation, either a future arrangement made by an agentive entity or a scheduled event in association with an inanimate entity, such as a movie or a train, right? But those are not future tenses as such, but they are uses of present tenses for the denotation of futurity. Those are not future tenses proper. You're welcome, Julieta. Okay, and before we go, unless somebody else has something to comment on, to say, of importance is to make the announcement that we have been, that we have made some decisions in terms of the term test. The term test will be on the same date that we anticipated it would be on at the beginning of the year. So the date hasn't changed. This is June the 27th. This is a Saturday. But we have decided to organize it so that you can work in groups. All right? So Mika has been arranging and, forming the groups. And so Mika will be able to anticipate some important information now.
Yes, so the groups were formed, like rearranged, because we have decided that the groups will be formed by 3 members. So I have taken the list that is in Guarani, and I have rearranged the groups, taking that information into account. So I have seen that some students that are here today with us and that have been participating on the classrooms are not on Guarani. So please check that you won't be, therefore, with us doing the exam. We will share the groups. I don't know when, Nati. We haven't talked about that yet. So
no, this is upcoming. So
yes.
we'll make the announcement, the official announcement through virtual classroom, and we'll post it soon. But we still need to talk between us, Mika.
And I don't know how much should I say.
How much more? I think that's enough.
Great.
So the term test will be then administered this way. So it won't entail individual work, but it'll entail group work. And the groups will be formed by us, taking into account the official list of students that we have on Guarani. So the important message before we go is for you to make sure that you are part of that list that we have access to, right? That your name is there, either you being a student that appears as estudiante regular or estudiante condicional.
Yes.
In any case, you'll be able to take the term test, but you've got to be on the list.
Yes.
All right. Okay, Margarita, hello. She's asking a question in terms of theory. 316, she's pointing to, let me see.
The chart, the self-study chart. That's the page for the...
You're saying we're writing the sentence on page 116.
So you mean,
Yeah,
Margarita, when writing your own examples of these usages, right?
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. It's just a question. While solving this exercise, I wondered, when creating the sentences, what happens, for instance, when we write a simple sentence like, suddenly Eliana opens the door and she explains something. First of all, I didn't write she, the pronoun here, the personal pronoun before the verb explain. And then I say, well, but English is a non-pro-drop language, so it doesn't allow for the dropping of subjects in sentences. Shouldn't we write the personal pronoun before this verb too? That was what I wondered.
And what do you think?
I think that after having analyzed many examples and after having read what postulated in the book and all that, that we do have to write the personal pronoun before the verb, even in this short, simple sentence.
Okay, any other opinion in the class? Okay, this is a special case, Margarita, because you see that there is the employment of coordination of different verbs pointing to situation types that are in line, connected to the same agent carrying them out. So this is an instance in which this entity that is represented by means of the third person pronoun she is depicted as performing. What are the actions? The sentence reads opening and explaining something. So two agentive situations involving the same agent. And the employment of the coordinating conjunction and makes it explicit that the referent associated with the second verb is the same as the one that is associated with the first one. So this is, other than when considering imperative sentences in English, one of the cases in which we have more leeway in English to leave out the pronoun, the explicit pronoun she, only because there is juxtaposition, coordination, right, of verbs associated with the same referent, the same entity performing the actions. So you can do both. Leave it explicit or leave it out, and given this specific use, by leaving she out, you would still produce a grammatical sentence in English.
Great. Thank you. That explains a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for participating so much. Okay, Mika, is there anything left in terms of our agenda for today?
No, we have covered everything.
Okay, so final announcement, we'll make this very crucial information for you guys in terms of who you'll be grouped with soon. When we get to organize all the details with Mika, which is round the corner. And but for the time being, you can know that you won't be working individually, but you will be working with 2 fellow students of yours when doing the term test. And of importance too is what Lourdes pointed out, that when you have a question, please use the mechanism that we have implemented in this class, so that not just you benefit from this doubt that you may have, but the rest of the members of the group that you belong to as well, in conjunction with, in addition to the rest of the student population, because we're sharing all these doubts with everyone here so that everyone can learn from the doubts that are being, tackled via classroom. Thank you, Lourdes, for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for being with us. We're here to help you have the most enjoyable as possible experience in contrastive grammar. So let us know how you're doing. If you have any questions, doubts, we are looking forward to hearing from you all the time. Okay. So Mika, I think you can stop recording and
Perfect.
And please stay put when everybody goes.